Hello everyone! The PivotBy function groups and aggregates data based on the specified row and column fields, so that you can get an output similar to a pivot table without actually having to use one. The pivot table on the right and the spill range of the function PivotBy on the left were both created from the same source data. But there is a feature of the pivot table for which the function PivotBy does not seem to have a straightforward solution. In a pivot table, you can add together value fields using a calculated field. For example, here, the total sales are the sum of store and online sales. To achieve the same effect using the function PivotBy, you will need a trick. So stay tuned till the end of the video to see how this is done. My source data shows online and store sales of the products of a bakery, and I need to analyze brand sales by category. To aggregate the sales, let's use a formula with the function PivotBy. As preparation work, let's convert this data range to a table by clicking in it and pressing Ctrl and T together. This way, if new rows get added to the table later, then the results of the formula referencing its columns will also be updated. Let's change the table style and call it sales. Let's use the function PivotBy to aggregate the sales. As the row field's argument, I will choose brand and click a second time to include the header. The categories are going to be the columns. And as the values, I will choose the store sales and online sales. As the aggregation function, I will choose sum. I have headers and I want them to be shown, so I'll choose number 3. I don't want the totals. The rows should be sorted according to the brand name. No grand totals. And I also don't need the other arguments, so I will end the formula here. For better visibility, I'm going to place the arguments of the function PivotBy on different lines. The function PivotBy follows a strict rule for aggregations. If there are several value columns like here, and just a single function, then this function will be applied to every value column. For example, here we have the sum of store sales and online sales for each combination of the branding category. If there are several value columns and a vector with the same number of functions as specified, then each function gets applied to a single column. In this example, there are 2 value columns, so instead of sum, I'm going to specify 2 functions, average and max, and to create the vector, I will wrap the function hstack around them. Now we see the average of store sales and the maximum value of online sales for each combination of branding category. By the way, if I use vstack instead of hstack in the formula, then the aggregations will be placed under one another instead of side by side. And if there is just a single value column and several functions, then each function will be applied to the single column. So when there are several value columns and a single function, there is no direct way to make PivotBy reference each value column separately in the aggregation. So we need a trick. For the trick to work, let's first understand how PivotBy actually passes the values to the function. PivotBy first groups the data based on the row and column fields that were specified. For each group, it then collects the corresponding values from the array in the values argument. The aggregation function, like sum, is then called once per group, and it receives the entire array of values for that group as its input. So the aggregation function receives an array of values corresponding to each unique combination of row and column fields. So we need to consider this logic and imitate how PivotBy works. I will need to adjust the formula the following way. First of all, I'm going to change the aggregation function. In addition to the standard functions, PivotBy also offers the function lambda, which is used for creating custom functions. The first argument of lambda is a variable or placeholder for the values argument of PivotBy. The second argument specifies what should happen to the variable. So the sum function can also be written like this. To imitate the logic of PivotBy, in the values argument, instead of the sales columns, I'm going to specify the row and column fields, concatenated with an ampersand. So PivotBy will pass a grouped array of row and column field combinations instead of the values to the lambda function, one group at a time. I will also use the function vstack to stack a header on top. Because I chose option 3, that I have headers and they need to be shown, PivotBy will not pass the headers to the lambda. Inside the sum function and the lambda wrapper, I'm going to use the filter function. The first argument is the array that needs to be filtered. Here, I'm going to add the two sales columns. The second argument is the condition which rows to include. And the concatenated brand and category columns should equal to the unique value from the array of concatenated combinations of row and column fields passed by PivotBy. The function unique is necessary because each time a group of same brand and category names is passed to the lambda, and we need a unique entry from this group. Let's check. And the sum is correct. So this is how you can trick the PivotBy function. And if you like this video, please like and subscribe for more content like this.